In a few short months, we are, as a country, going to be participating in a free and honest election, or at least that's what they tell us. The question I have for my potential elected official, and I hope that you share the same idea, is why is it that when our senators and our members of Congress convene in the halls of such bodies, do veterans not get their own conversation? Why is veteran legislation always full of pork and other things hiding? For example, back in 2022, when the government was having discussion about the newly released PACT Act, well, it's not new anymore, I'm almost 2 years old. Why was there a $400 billion discretionary fund turned into mandatory funding? Or at least that's what was proposed. Today's conversation is going to center around such topics. So before we continue, let's bring in Jason. Because the title says Richard and Jason. So here's Jason. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. And you?
Very good. So the conversation for today is something that you and I have discussed a few times off camera. And it is about veterans legislation in our federal government. And I think it's one that you get pretty animated about, which I appreciate. But it holds true every time. When there are pivotal topics that have to deal with the veteran culture and the veteran community in this country, the legislation that's written is never really standalone. It's never really just for veterans. I don't want to seem like I'm ungrateful or that we are treated unfairly, but in a certain respect, I think we are. What say you, Jason?
Well, I think where the veteran community is always a thing that can be used as either a carrot or dynamite when it comes to advancing causes. They always seem to come around when there's an election cycle looking for veteran support. No question
Absolutely.
about that, right? And it's very difficult, regardless of which side of the fence that you're on, to be staunchly opposed to serving veterans, certainly through the VA. And so it's so odd to me that we have something that is so specific, a benefit earned by people that worked for the government, that it's never a standalone. It's never by itself. It's always something that ends up being commingled with some other trash that has no place associated with the vote on what they're going to call it. So they call it, the PACT Act.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And here, and looking through things and seeing these numbers, it took $319 billion to fully fund the VA in fiscal year 24, bro. Right.
Wow.
Right. So now these are huge numbers. There's no question about that. The amount of tax dollars that are going into the VA system are astronomical. But going back to that 22 conversation that you had when we were talking about mandatory to discretionary, right? My question would be, retrospectively, could we look into that and see if the PACT Act bill in of itself was the $400 billion in discretionary funding also attached to the actual funding mechanism for the PACT Act and the VA? Because it seems to me that $400 billion was just an initial or a add-on. It's basically the bags on the back of your bike, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to buy the bike, but guess what? We got $400 billion in the back bags that we're going to be dragging along on this trip, and we're just going to whip them off wherever we want to. Now, nobody wants to vote against that PACT Act bill. But I can also understand why, theoretically, our politicians would want to vote against something like that. Why do you have twice the amount of money that it takes to produce the widget, which is VA healthcare, with some discretionary funding BS?
Yeah, well, and I think that's probably what held it up, right? Because the conversation about the PACT Act, if I'm not mistaken, took a lot longer than it really should have. Right. And so hopefully the cause of that was to iron this stuff out. Because to the best of my knowledge, this $400 billion that they speak of did not get switched to mandatory from discretionary. And just so everyone watching or listening can understand, in the government, when we talk about mandatory versus discretionary funding, your mandatory money, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, your mandatory money is the use it or lose it money. So if you ever served in the military and you were coming up on the end of the fiscal year in September, October. And you heard some scuttlebutt about, well, we got to figure out what we're going to buy, because if we don't spend it, we won't get it next year. And so if any office, any branch of military, any agency within the federal government, if they get $400 billion and don't spend it all, well, they don't get $400 billion next year. And so what I think happens is that we find this bullshit going into veteran legislation, because now these places need to spend their money. And the whole thing gets clouded because there's ulterior motives. And I like that you talked about this is an earned thing. And we're not just talking about VA disability benefits, but all of it, your home loan, your medical care, your dental, if you get it from the VA, which if you get VA dental, you're at the top of the mountain, son.
Or the bottom.
Well, or the bottom. But as
yes.
far as care goes in a VA facility, if you're getting dental, you're up there. But these things were earned in blood, sweat, and tears. And the idea that, number one, the idea that veterans get used as guinea pigs in this government all the time is astounding to me, or it used to be anyway. Now it's just kind of status quo. But I guess my question would be, what are these politicians and these people in these offices have to lose that they can't just have a conversation about veterans issues and that's it and be done with it?
Well, especially when you think about the veteran voting block for what it is. I mean, we're talking, depending upon whose numbers you want to look at, 18 to 20 million.
Yeah.
Is our population point, which, based on 330, I mean, whatever, roughly 7 to 8%, depending upon whose numbers you want to look at. That's a pretty heavy, that's a sizable number in comparison to years past. I mean, of course, 2 decades of war will give that to you, wonderfully. But then here we sit. And so maybe this is the opportunity in 24 with folks that want to earn our vote. Let's ask them if they're willing to step up to the mic and actually put legislation forward that says specifically, when it comes to the VA, I'm not talking military, I'm not talking defense spending, I'm not talking about any of those other albatrosses that, for the love of Pete, we only have an hour a day to talk about it and not 27 hours, but specifically the VA. Stand VA bills alone and don't touch them. Be the person that's up there, because I don't think it's a left or right thing.
Shouldn't be.
No, and the only time that we see it is if the Republicans are in control and the Democrats are in a minority position, and the Republicans are putting a bunch of pork and other business that doesn't belong in that bill in there. Of course, the Democrats are going to naturally vote against it because they're not in the position to get the discretionary money to go do their pet projects, and vice versa. So it happens both ways. If you took the BS out of it, I think that, talk about an engaging thing. If you actually saw our Senate or our House get together and vote and have like an 85% plus consortium, an agreement to a yay or a nay vote, that would finally get us somewhere. And so maybe asking those people that want our vote, this is an important time, this is an opportunity, or maybe those that are currently sitting members of the Senate or House could maybe hear this and be challenged to it, to bring that forward and say, this is my line in the sand. Enough of this nonsense. Government is already terribly difficult. And could you imagine the amount of time these people spend on Capitol Hill arguing all this BS?
Well, that's the thing, is that having standalone legislation would also make the process just scream a lot faster. Now we don't have to argue about, this $25 million we need to buy, silk roses for the entryway. No, screw all that crap. If we are going to, as a government, take care of the men and women that chose to serve this country, why does that involve any other conversation, right? So I think that you did it, so let's just perpetuate it. If you are an elected official and you want to take the stand, here at Disgruntled, we offer you the ability to use this platform to talk about it, to say it. And if we're off base, furthermore, then come on the show and tell us we're off base and why. The one thing you will learn about us as you continue to watch our content is that we don't need to be the heroes, right? But these are things that nobody's talking about. And so now that, Jason, like you mentioned, veterans in this country have the ability to force themselves to be heard.
Right.
We are now a big enough population to be able to go to elected officials and tell them, if you want the veteran vote, these are the things that we would like to see.
Right.
I mean, all those pukes with BLM did it.
Right. Well, and how amazing is it that now we have a consortium of Joe Snuffies out there that can get together and actually make something happen.
Yeah.
You know, if we could only band up and get to places where we have real representation in government.
Agreed.
You know, that's been another loaded issue for veterans like me. I won't speak for you. Maybe I will. But it's always the hero bracket. It's always the field grade officers that are out there representing us. You know, I was a turd. Like, I was the bottom of the bucket. Well, actually, if the bottom of the bucket had a hole and that was covered with filth, that's where I was, right? I was never a powerful person. I never had a lot of rank. I didn't have any of these other things. And the vast majority of a veteran population understands that. Maybe they're the E5 to E6 or belows. You know, I'd love to see that demographic too, just to see how many people ever rose above E6 inside of the veteran population, because I think there's a lot of one or two tour hits and then they're out. But anyway, you know, getting back to that is who's going to represent the rank and file. You know, we're constantly being led by the quote unquote elites. And the VA has been no different, and those that speak for us. And, you know, you've got Luttrell. Is he out of Texas or Florida?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And then you've got, to a much lesser extent, Dan Crenshaw. But we have some military members that are in place, and, you know, Tulsi Gabbard or a few names that kind of come to mind. But, you know, here we have these names and these voices, bro. How often have we heard them over the past few years talking? But nobody's ever said anything. Yeah, and when they do talk, they're not talking about this.
No.
It's like, you know, you understand Harley Davidson motorcycles, and I think when politicians, you know, finally take that, they get that first opportunity into politics. That's got to be like a really fast learning curve. You know, either that or they're so well coached or handled. I don't know if you want to call them coached. You know what I mean? They're kind of told what to do. They don't really get to bring their own persona forward. They don't get to be who they are. And, you know, maybe that's just another entire topic in and of amongst its, in and of itself. But it's so surprising to me to have veterans of those calibers with those stories get into our political landscape and just never talk about it or bring it home. Like, if I had the opportunity, even at a city level, bro, we would be doing all sorts of veteran specific things in my community.
But that's exactly the point, bro, is that we as a community, as a culture, didn't have enough numbers to make it worth it for them.
Right.
And it's sad that even has to be part of the conversation. So in the past, I did work for a member of Congress at one point doing military and VA work. And people would call in all the time with topics such as this. Well, what is the congressman going to do about pork and VA spending or VA legislation? And unfortunately, the answer usually is, well, unless we get 15 to 20,000 people in the district or in your assigned area that you were elected to make a stink about it, it doesn't give them reason enough. Their words doesn't give them reason enough to take action on it, because it's not going to gain any traction. If we don't have enough people calling in to talk about it already, but we have 200,000 constituents calling in telling us that, you know, Main Street is destroyed and it's bullshit. It needs to be fixed now. It's dangerous for the kids and blah, 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 blah. Those are the things that they're going to take action on. And so the thing about this show that we have that makes this great is that we are those regular guys. We are those regular dudes that signed up to join the military for whatever reason, whether it was school money, whether it was because you were compelled because of 9/11 or before, whatever your reason for joining is. I don't ever cast shade on that, because at the end of the day, you had the balls, well, or the fortitude to to sign up, to sign on the dotted line and serve your country, whether it was for 4 years, 2 years, or 25 years.
Right.
And in my opinion, nobody's service is better than the others. And so, again, what makes this show great is that we are those regular guys that just signed up to do a job, serve our country, and serve it honorably. We are not the Marcus Luttrell's, Morgan's brother, Congressman Luttrell's brother. We're not Chris Kyle. We're not Yako. We're not all those SF guys and those Rangers that are out in the media, which are great because they also bring a lot of attention to the veteran causes. And so, again, I mean, no disrespect. I'm not casting any shade on those guys, but we don't often hear the voice of the guys that didn't make it above E5, E6. Right. Maybe because they feel like they're powerless. But I'm here to tell you that now we are not powerless. We have the numbers to be able to have these discussions in a professional way with the people that can change it, that can start the change. And to me, in my opinion, man, this is unprecedented. We've never, like you said, we've never in the history of our country had a percentage of the population be those that served, that can have a voice that's, I don't want to use the word meaningful, but has the ability to start change. And so I guess maybe that's what this conversation is wrapping up to be. The other thing you'll learn quickly about Jason and I is that we get off into the weeds pretty good, and sometimes the shows just take on their own topics. But this is important.
It's hugely important.
Hugely important.
It really is. And any veteran out there, hopefully more and more veterans come and can partake and give us information back, or at least listen to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And hopefully they find a place where, we're talking about things that really impact them, which is always the goal. It's the desire, because it impacts us. There's not been a time where I've enjoyed speaking with you where it hasn't been something that impacted me either prior to the conversation or very shortly after. And so, this conversation today, it's actually had me going. You'll see on my, 2002 circa Hewlett Packard computer here in front of me. I was just thinking about, like, as we were discussing it, that voting block. And so again, I started looking. I know there was vetsvoice.org. Did you ever heard of them?
Mm-mm.
Okay, they were like 2005, 2006, kind of came on the scene. Kind of after that first wave of veteran was starting to come back home. But there just hasn't been a ton of traction to draw veterans in. And we do have a very, very diverse demographic and background. It's roughly a 50-50 conservative versus liberal coming out of the military. So we are not a divisive group either. We don't really steer one way or the other, which again, I think is super unique. And again, it's why it's so befuddling that they don't just put the shit the way out that it needs to happen. And that gets back into when you were talking about discretionary spending versus monetary or mandatory spending. Sorry, word soup. But that should be another show where we actually discuss just how these things actually come to pass. Like, think about the government like a business. The fact that you need to spend all that money to get it the next year, how foolish. Just the amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that comes out of that. Because I don't know about you, but there were many times where we sat on the range and we weren't firing to qualify. We were firing to get through 15 million rounds or whatever that number was. You remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
Those days just, and as a regular grunt turd,
it was
like
awesome.
We are, super fun. Me, never wanted to partake. You know why? I hated cleaning my weapon.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, I hated it.
I used to lick my fingers gunpowder's tasty, bro. That's probably why you weren't in the infantry. You were doing much more important things, like making sure things were working properly.
I'm still trying to understand. You eat gunpowder?
I didn't eat it, but every now and then you just Give yourself a little
tasty
little
treat.
taste, man. You keep the shit in your system, it makes one hell of a fighting machine, or at least that was the idea. I guess I don't know if I was I wouldn't say that I was a superstar on the battlefield.
Starting to think there were some byproducts of that.
But I made it.
I can't argue with results. Right?
I suppose not. But I think that this is something that, you know, this brings up the topic of like even just voting, right? Like I understand that there are a lot of people in this country that are, I've heard from a lot of people personally. So, well, I'm not even going to vote this year.
Right. What a
Well,
waste.
why not? Well, it doesn't matter anyway. Elections aren't free. They're not fair. They're not this. They're not that. Okay, I don't necessarily disagree with that.
Yeah.
But now that we have the numbers that we have, if not for anything else, it's important to go vote if you are a veteran of this country so that they can see it.
Right.
So that they can see, oh my God, look at this. We got 20 million votes and, 4 million of them or 3 million of them or whatever were veterans. Maybe we should be talking to them for the next time around. So
Right.
This may not happen this year, but every time that you are able to vote, I urge you to go do that. Because once the powers that be, the puppet masters, they start seeing that veterans are turning out to vote, and then they see things like this show and people participating in activities like this and talking about all these things, then they're gonna hopefully understand it better. And if we do it right as a community, it doesn't matter if they get it or not, because eventually we'll just be in your face.
Right. And if you don't participate, you have no right to bitch.
You can't say nothing about
I've
say a
never
damn
understood that. And I know the veteran population has had a propensity to be negligent in their voting obligation. I mean, how many times, bro, have we sat there and I talked to my buddies and they're just like, no, I'm out. I'm like, you have to. Like we fought for that in foreign countries. I mean, I remember watching the first election in Iraq, and dipping people's hands in the purple and all these things. It's like that simple action is what gives everybody the voice. That's what gives you the ability to participate in your own country's growth and experience. And the fact that the veteran population, think about the things that the veteran population have done in foreign lands to give people the right to have a voice in their countries. When they came home, they chose not to do so. That is astounding.
Powerful.
And if we can, on this show, do anything, if we can increase voting participation amongst veterans, that would be a wonderful win.
Absolutely. And then and then as a community, we have a reason to bitch. Right? I mean, we're going to do it anyway. If you didn't know, you're going to learn that we're going to bitch anyway. And so if we're going to be doing that, we might as well have it mean a whole lot more than what it means to us. Because to be quite honest, it's a little therapeutic to bitch about the VA, to bitch about the government, to bitch about the military. But at the end of the day, knowing what I know now, if I could time travel, like our friend Judy talks about time traveling, I would still join. I would still go in.
Yeah.
If I knew in 2001 that I was going to be in my early 40s and sometimes barely be able to move, I would still do it.
Right. Yeah, I would never give up the experiences that we had.
Never.
I mean, that's
and more than the experiences, man, it's about the people.
Yeah.
It's about the people. And whether you believed in the reason why we were in Iraq or not, whether you thought it was worthwhile or it was bullshit, I guess to me as much, that didn't matter at all.
Bro, anybody that wasted time thinking about the reason that you were there was not the person you wanted to be around, because that it's inconsequential at that point.
Right.
Not to say that you don't need to have a belief in it, but the fact is that's the job that you have now. You can't pick and choose once you have the job if you believe in the company. Nah, bro, you're in. It's pickle suit time.
Yeah.
It's go time. And we're going, we're putting one in the tube. It's time to roll.
And unfortunately, You can't just say, hey, man, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. I
No,
quit.
I had a couple of guys try.
Absolutely. And those that tried were in a whole lot longer than it would have just taken them to finish out their time.
Right.
Absolutely.
But no, it's incredible, and I think, and I'm so grateful to OpsLens to give us this opportunity.
Yeah.
To get out there and hopefully what we're talking about will resonate in one way, shape, or form, because I don't think, in a lot of the people that when I first met Richard and he told me about what he did, I thought this was way out there. I bend nails for a living. Like I pound wood together and make structures. Like I'm a caveman amongst cavemen.
Well, but you do it well. Folks, Jason here is a savant of sorts in many things. Putting wood together, banging nails, it just happens to be one of your strong suits. So don't downplay that.
Well, but where I was going was the fact that I didn't know that there were people like Richard out there talking about this stuff. And then the more I went out and searched for more information, I realized how diluted that field was, because it's a lot of nonsense. And I think the reality and the fact that these things are truly important to you are what make this so much more enjoyable for me.
Well, it's important to me because I feel like we have a lot of discussions in a lot of different circles about how things should be and how they were intended to be. And a lot of discussions about why they aren't the way they should be. And it always goes back to the same thing. It always goes back to government, of course. But at the end of the day, we can't just talk about it all the time. We have to be able to move forward in a way that's going to help our community as a whole. And so I guess I shouldn't say we can't just talk about it, because that's what we're doing here. We're talking about it, but the goal is not to just talk about it.
Right. The goal is to talk, to activate, and then create positive outcomes.
Absolutely.
I mean, these things aren't that difficult. Like that's the crazy thing. Like getting somebody to engage with changing one specific legislation in this country that is so specific to a particular culture of people who have earned said benefits. This should be a very easy thing to get done. And I think that's going to be the goal for 24, is make those phone calls, talk to people, and hopefully pound this frequency out there as hard as we possibly can to ensure that at least we get a response out of one. Because we're not going to move the mountain, but we can start moving one grain of sand at a time.
Absolutely.
Every show.
Well, and so my question is this. All these things that over all the years we've been told about how our government takes care of veterans and how communities support veterans, but yet you still hear veterans talking about the same thing, the same shitty experiences at the VA, the same shitty experiences at their county veteran service offices. And so, not to say that everybody involved is a piece of garbage,
No.
And I will also add to that, people who are bitching usually don't ever bitch about good things, right? So to have this idea that the VA is 100% bad for 100% of veterans is not accurate. I've had some really good experiences at the VA. You have too.
Love the VA.
But I can also say in the same breath that they almost killed me. I had an operation and they wrote on this half gallon of liquid morphine to take 2 tablespoons every 4 hours or something like that. It was, and I turned jaundice and I had to go back into the VA for 5 days until they got my liver functions normal. But still to this day, every time I get blood work, I get an email or a text or a call about how my liver function is through the roof, and it's super concerning.
Wow.
Well, and so it's never the same.
Well, right.
But I've had amazing experiences at the VA, and the frontline people are great. But the point is this: when our politicians and the powers that be talk about all these great things that they're trying to do for veterans, my question very simply is, well, why isn't it happening?
Right.
Just why?
Right.
If you're going to feed us a community of people a line of bullshit and not follow through, just don't say anything at all.
Right. Just be quiet. Just stop.
Yes. And I imagine that the shit slinging is going to get worse because of the fact that we are now a bigger population and we do have the ability to show up in numbers. And not only that, but I think that the population in this country that is supportive of the regular guy veteran and the Hollywood veteran, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call it, is very large too. And so I think that it might start a chain reaction. If veterans can get on board and stand up for ourselves and ask the hard questions and have the hard conversations, it's going to invoke change in a lot of people. And they are also going to stand up and start asking questions and being loud, because what population of people in this country deserve it more? And being a part of that community, I don't want it to sound like a loaded question, but to me, it's pretty simple, right? For example, I get shit from people all the time about different benefits that I use, like being when I was my senior year of college. And just so you guys know, it took me 20 years to finish college. So when I say my senior year, it wasn't very long ago. But I remember being in the bookstore, getting my books for the semester, and telling them, well, I'm a VA student. And so they take inventory and then they charge the VA because I was using my education benefits. And two people next to me had comments about it.
Yeah.
Well, why the hell do you get free books? What makes you so special?
But that's the thing. You said the word that I don't like, and that's deserved. There are earned benefits.
That's a good
point. As a veteran,
yeah, I agree.
There's nothing about the VA. Like I would be remiss if over the next year you will not get to know more and more about the problems that I have and the problems that hopefully, you'll probably be sharing some of your problems. You just hit us with one,
hopefully
the overrun, but giving folks a better understanding. A lot of these things that the VA deals with veterans, they are not typically found in the population. With the PACT Act thing, it's a neat acronym.
Yeah.
But people don't understand. It's because you have heavy metal poisonings. You've got lung issues, respiratory issues. These are the things that you would normally see at like 12:30 in the morning. Have you or one of your loved ones succumbed to asbestos? Like the PACT Act should be an infomercial in and of itself. And so I think if people are willing to hear, they're going to hear much more about a lot of those problems that a lot of us face in silence. And a lot of us as veterans, we don't want to talk about our susceptibility, right? It's that pickle suit that kept us safe when we were overseas and our buddies, but then once you get back home and you realize, oh, it's not because I'm old. I'm kind of effed up. Like I got some problems that aren't normal, and that was a harsh reality for a guy like me, to think that, some of these things that I was dealing with, I had kind of attributed to my age. And certainly they probably shouldn't have onset in their 30s. But again, looking back on it 15 years later, it starts to make a little more sense.
How old are you?
45.
Oh, yikes.
Aged. Yeah.
But these are the things that you have to live with, right? Life doesn't stop because you have medical issue A, B, C, D, E, and F. You have to figure out how to navigate life with those things. And I understand what you're saying when you say you just attribute them to getting older. Well, you do that until they get bad enough and you have no choice but to swallow your pride and go in to see a doctor, whether it's VA or otherwise. And then they tell you, well, I can't believe you've been dealing with this that long.
Dude, yeah. And
you finally find that one medical professional that's like, oh boy, well, here you go. We're going to do this, and you're going to take this. And then in less than a month's time, you feel like you're 25 again.
Right.
And then that's when you realize, holy shit, this is not normal.
No.
And veterans live by this mentality that if you don't mind, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
right? So if I just ignore it, if I ignore my tooth pain, if I ignore my back pain, if I ignore the fact that I'm 32 years old and when I got to piss, it takes me about 19 minutes to do that.
I'm on my 5th colonoscopy by 32.
Yeah.
Totally normal.
That's not normal.
Right.
But the other thing that our culture suffers from, in my opinion, is pride. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of fortitude to swallow your pride and admit that you're not right, because we were trained to just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just deal with it later. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Right.
And I think that that's why veterans who are entering in the early, mid, and late 40s, they all of a sudden have this epiphany that I've been screwed up for 15 years. And so like it's all a domino effect, right? Because some people then also get super depressed about the time they've missed doing the things that they love, playing with their kids or playing golf or lifting weights or whatever it is. They've lost that.
Right.
So then again, there is another sacrifice that this person made for us as a country. This proverbial blanket of freedom. I really don't like using that term, but it fits, right? There's this proverbial blanket of protection. And some people think, well, I'm owed that. I'm an American and I'm owed that.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe you're right, but also understand that it costs something. It costs a lot.
Bill.
Yes. And if it's not going to be you, okay. A very wise man once told me, he was a World War II veteran that I met at the VA hospital, probably in 2011. Right, it was actually right before my second deployment. I was at the VA, doing a little story. I was at the VA to see about some kind of sleep apnea treatment that I didn't have to plug into the wall, because we were getting ready to be. What I didn't know about the upcoming deployment is that we'd live in a building with air conditioning.
You were going to be in an ice house.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't have to worry about it. I could bring my CPAP if I needed it. And I met this old guy, and he was all wrapped around the axle about how the civilian culture in this country just throws veterans in the gutter. And I could understand his perspective, but I also added to the conversation that it's not necessarily like that anymore. There is a lot of support for veterans. And so I asked him, I'm like, well, so why do you think not everybody serves? Mm-hmm. He goes, well, somebody's got to sit on the curb and cheer as the heroes pass by. And so this is a guy that's coming from an era of military that they got ticker tape parades when they came home.
Right.
And so he was telling me about that. And it was a super interesting conversation. But we can't all do it. It's not for everybody. In fact, there's many people that I've met in my travels that were not in the military, and I was really glad that they weren't interested.
Correct.
And there's a lot of people now in the military that I would be really glad if they weren't interested, but we need people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole nother show, folks. This recruitment issues and attrition issues. It's a huge deal. So I don't know, man. I think to wrap it up, we should be in the next coming months talking to our politicians. Talk about it in the driveway when you're having a beer with your neighbor. Talk about it at work. Talk about it at home. Talk to your kids about these types of things, because that's important too. And we have the ability as a culture to sway elections. Just think about that.
But they got to pay attention to us. If we're voting and we're out there, they have to pay attention. We're not going to sway anything, but we can make an impact. We can actually finally fire for effect.
With effectiveness.
Oh, yeah.
We're not just sitting in the woods calling in some bullshit coordinates. So, folks, anytime it comes up, have the conversation. Please do that. That's what we're here for. Also, I want to say that if there's anything that we talk about today or any other time that you want to provide input in, of course, please comment on it. You can email us. If there's topics you think we should be talking about that we're not, we want this show, this platform to be inclusive to everybody that wants to contribute. Something constructive. We should probably preface that. Something constructive to the conversations that are being had or need to be had. Also, other veterans, if we get something wrong, tell us we got it wrong. Again, we don't need to be the heroes. So before we end shows, my deepest passion is to give you our final thoughts on the conversation, things to take with you as you continue to navigate your day. So, and I always go last. So Jason, I'm going to need you to look at your camera and give the lovely people a final thought on today's discussion.
Well, thank you, Richard Springer. With this new platform, I just hope that we have the opportunity to represent veterans to the best of our ability, to share personal experiences and stories with all of you, so you too can live in a world. And this is to quote my great friend Aaron. You will start to you don't know what you don't know until you know it. We want to be adding the you know it at the end, and that's my thoughts for today.
See how easy that is, bro?
Yeah, super easy.
You did great. We're going to get Jason used to that. I mean, I think that it's effective, right? I mean, because if we're going to spend the time sitting down here talking to you and trying to invoke change in our community, I want you to be able to take with you things that are important. And so when we have these discussions, I have things that I think are important, just like Jason does. And so maybe it'll help you also to think about your final thoughts for the discussion. And so my final thoughts for today's discussion is this. There is no reason why the people that we elect to sit in offices of power should not be listening to everything that's helpful when it comes to their campaigns and their elections. There's a lot of crap out there that really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But we are now a group of people that matter. And to be thorough, there's a lot of things that were earned. And I don't believe that a lot of men and women are getting the things that they earned. And so when we talk about writing legislation and new laws and all this other stuff, remember that these were things that were earned. And so we shouldn't feel bad about holding our leaders accountable. We shouldn't feel bad about holding them to the fire when they call us to ask us for our vote. Because these things are important. This country was built on the blood of great men and women that came long before us. And I don't think that we should forget that. So until next week, I want you to chew on that, think about that. And we will be back with you next week. Thank you for watching. This was our first show, by the way. I don't think that I said anything, Jason. This was our first show on the OpsLens Network. No. It's great to be here. And so our goal is to bring you all kinds of great content. And if you don't find it helpful, that's okay. But I can promise you that it'll be entertaining. It'll be entertaining. We got lots of ideas. So stick with us. We'll be back next week. Have a great night.